So we're going from Gerald Tanenbaum to Michael Tenenbaum.
It's actually the same name.
It's the same name with an error somewhere along the spelling. So Michael Tenenbaum is a lawyer in California and New York and a visiting law professor in France. What a gig, huh? A graduate of Harvard Law School, Michael represents businesses in state and federal court litigation with a focus on cases involving international issues. Michael is at the forefront of animal agriculture products in interstate commerce. His recent work includes defending against a host of lawsuits brought by animal rights groups against poultry farmers, restaurants, and renowned chefs. These cases raise high-profile issues concerning animal welfare, consumer preferences, and free market economics.
Hello. Great. Thank you for that introduction. I'm very delighted to be here, and I want to thank Patty for inviting me. I love the theme of this conference, which is the conversation begins with you, and that's what I'd like to have my part of this presentation be, a bit more of a conversation. I didn't prepare PowerPoint slides. I intend to talk a little bit about the cases kind of at the front lines that I have to deal with, defending producers and people who deal with animals against lawsuits brought by animal rights extremists, is the way I like to refer to them. And so before I start, try to echo some of what Jerry said, and no relation, at least not that we've discovered yet, but give us a couple hours for some Jewish geography and it might come through. I want to just echo some of the themes he said with a clip from something that you probably have already seen, or many of you may have seen. It's a little 2-minute segment of a TV show that I think points up really the direction in which the movement is going, not just in terms of legal rights, but the ultimate goal. So let me see if I can get this to play.
Thank you for buying me that bag the other day.
Come on. It's more for me than you.
God, you have beautiful eyes.
Everyone tells me that.
I'm the only one that told you that.
No, I don't mean like in a flirty way, but people, when I was a kid, like, you got great eyes. It's like, I'm just a guy.
You're my guy.
I am your guy.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Hi, hello.
My name is Dana. I'll be taking care of you today. If you have any questions about the menu, please let me know.
I guess I do have a question about the chicken, if you could just tell us a little bit more about it.
The chicken is a heritage breed, woodland-raised chicken that's been fed a diet of sheep's milk, soy, and hazelnuts.
Okay, this is local?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm gonna ask you just one more time, and it's local.
It is.
Is that USDA organic, or Oregon organic, or Portland organic?
It's just all across the board, organic.
The hazelnuts, these are local?
How big is the area where the chickens are able to roam free?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I had exactly the same question.
4 acres. Give me just a second. I'll be right back, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
She's nice.
Well, you're doing the right thing.
I'm too apologetic.
You are.
I drove way too slow here today, didn't I?
Yeah.
I am so weird with that gas pedal. I think just moves the whole vehicle forward. And
All right, so here is the chicken you'll be enjoying tonight.
You have this information. This is fantastic.
Absolutely. His name was Colin. Here are his papers, okay?
That's great. He looks like a happy little guy who runs around. A lot of friends, other chickens as friends. Putting his little wing around another one and kind of like palling around.
I don't know that I can speak to that level of intimate knowledge about him. They do a lot to make sure that their chickens are very happy.
When you say they, I mean, who are these people raising Colin?
It's a farm that's located about 30 miles south of Portland.
You have a good relationship with this farm?
We do.
But is that some guy on a yacht who lives in Miami?
Oh,
who's
goodness,
just
no.
saying that he's organic?
It tears at the core of my being the idea of someone just cashing in on a trend like organic.
No, I know the type, no.
Yeah.
Tell you what, we're gonna go check it out if you don't mind. Just if you could hold our seats.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and we'll be right back. Just want to make sure it.
Just, thank you so much, Dana.
Sure.
So I play that because it seems a bit ridiculous until you actually look at some of the cases that are filed by the animal rights groups and the things that we have to defend as lawyers. I know that John is going to talk a little bit about some of the shameless dishonesty that the animal rights groups bring in their litigation. I've had to deal with the whole gamut of them: Animal Protection and Rescue League, Animal Legal Defense Fund, PETA, the Humane Society of the United States, Farm Sanctuary. I've been opposite every one of those groups in court, and it's not a fun experience. It's certainly not fun for the clients that have to deal with it. But I'm here to talk about a handful of those cases. We could spend a whole day doing it, but I'm going to talk about just a handful of those cases to give you a flavor of some of the things that are brought. Jerry didn't mention the lawsuit brought by PETA just last year, talking about animals as slaves, brought in federal district court, in which PETA argued that the retention of the orcas at SeaWorld in captivity, it's fitting that we're not far away, violates the slavery and involuntary servitude provisions of the 13th Amendment. You may remember that that was enacted to give rights to free slaves in the United States, human slaves. Their argument was that, and just think about this in terms of the animals that you take care of, what made it slavery? They argued that the orcas are being held as slaves, because, and I'm quoting here, because they're held physically and psychologically captive without the means of escape. They're separated from their homes and families. They're unable to engage in natural behaviors, determine their own course of action or way of life. They're subject to the will and desires of SeaWorld, and they're subject to artificial insemination or sperm collection for the purposes of involuntary breeding, right? So you have this basically reflects something along the lines of the 9 billion chickens that we have in this country, also the turkeys that you have at your Thanksgiving dinner, most pets, and that is the mindset and that is the rationale that they use. Unfortunately, and part of my message today is to just be fearful of what the courts are willing to do. Unfortunately, you have courts that dignify these arguments to some degree, that give credibility to some of these arguments. And how do they do that? What should the opinion have looked like that dismissed that case? What should the judge's opinion have looked like that dismissed that lawsuit? It should have been 4 words, right? This is ridiculous, period. Case dismissed. It was said it was 2,600 words. It took the judge to go through and analyze why orcas are not entitled to protection under the 13th Amendment, which was designed for humans. And then the judge ended his opinion with a statement that the animal rights activists trumpet, where he said, even though plaintiffs lack standing to bring a 13th Amendment claim, that's not to say that animals have no legal rights. And then he says, while the goal of Next Friends in seeking to protect the welfare of orcas is laudable, the 13th Amendment affords no relief to the plaintiff. So you have courts that give credit to this, and in that case they were able to get out on a motion to dismiss, but not everyone's so lucky. So let me talk about a handful of cases that we've had to deal with. A lot of them concern the treatment of animals. There's not one person in this room that isn't going to say and is going to be proud of the way that they treat their animals. But for every one of you, there's somebody else outside this room that's going to tell you that what you're doing, in their view, is cruel. And what you're doing in their view is inhumane. And so a lot of litigation that we've seen in the last couple of years centers around the use of the term humane. There's a famous case pending in the Northern District, in the District of New Jersey, federal court, where Purdue chickens put on their packaging that their chickens were humanely raised, and the animal rights groups are suing them, orchestrated a lawsuit against them, basically to challenge that claim. And the question is, what's humane? So you would think that that's a matter of personal opinion. The Animal Legal Defense Fund brought a lawsuit years ago, and they claimed, let's see if we find it here, they claimed that, give me a second. They claimed that, here's what their argument was, that keeping a monkey in a cage without other monkeys in the same cage was inhumane. They said, for example, Jernov, the plaintiff, might find it aesthetically pleasing to view primates kept in other groups, and that was the basis of his claim. One judge recognized the issue here and said, well, although he might find it aesthetically pleasing, another person might prefer to watch them kept alone. Still another person might prefer to see primates in brightly colored cages, or in cages in which recordings of Mozart piano concertos are played around the clock, or not in cages at all. But the majority in that case said that the case could go forward, even though the use of the term was humane. The court ended up saying, at least the dissenting judge, humaneness, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. One's individual judgment about what is or is not humane depends entirely on one's personal notion of compassion and sympathy. Quote, I find it difficult to imagine a more subjective concept than this. And yet the courts have allowed these cases to get past the dismissal stage. What does that mean? It means you have to sit to your client and say, we can't get this case out with a motion to dismiss. You can't pay X dollars to make an initial request to the court that they throw it out because it has no merit, because the courts will listen to these arguments. So the first case that I want to tell you about is one brought by the Animal Protection and Rescue League. I represent a whole series of chefs, including some celebrity chefs in California. Several of them made statements to various public outlets, which you, I think, have a First Amendment right to do in this country. One was speaking to NPR, one was writing in the Los Angeles Times. They basically said that they thought, in their view, that the foie gras that they served came from ducks that were happy. That the ducks were running around and happy and not treated inhumanely. For that offense, they got sued and dragged into court. A lawsuit filed against them saying that they were violating false advertising laws because of what they were doing, and they got sued. We were able to get that case dismissed and found it to be a violation of actually my client's free speech rights and won attorney's fees awards against them. That was fortunate, but it took a year and a half to do that before the judge came around and recognized what was going on. In another lawsuit, I represent a bunch of foie gras farmers, duck and geese farmers, and we were sued, and I can't talk too much about the case, but for calling our product the humane choice. As you can imagine, if you raise ducks, you have a choice between raising them in individual cages, like the French do, or you can raise them in collective pens, like my clients do, and we thought, at least the ones in New York, and we thought that that was made that more humane. We also don't put our ducks in cages on trucks to take them to a slaughterhouse, because we have a slaughterhouse right there on the premises. We just move them down the hall and slaughter them there. Well, the Animal Legal Defense Fund thought that was false advertising to call yourself the humane choice. Because why? They knew a woman in Brooklyn who, out of her apartment, made a lentil, onion, and walnut dip that contained no duck and no duck liver, and she said only that is the humane type of foie gras. And so she's losing sales, she contended, to our foie gras products because of our claim, not because she makes an $8 bean dip. Anyway, these are the arguments they make, and they make these arguments in courts. That case took a year to resolve, and I can't talk about the resolution of it because it's subject of settlement, but that took a year to resolve and what's amazing about it is what the judge said in that case. At some point I was in front of the judge and he said, well, what's humane about your product? And I said, well, we're not here to discuss that at this motion, but let me tell you. And then he interrupted me to say, you kill the duck, right? I said, I hope Your Honor doesn't think that the fact that we kill the duck renders my client somehow doing something inhumane. And it took a while for him to realize that that was something that you were allowed to do. I had to point him to the Humane Slaughter Act that's in effect, and a whole other things. It's actually kind of stunning. At one point he says, well, you kill the duck, you don't reuse it, do you? And I said, how do you answer that as an advocate politely to a court, to a federal judge that holds your client's face in hand? So there is a stunning level. There's a stunning level of judicial, I wouldn't call it ignorance, but ignorance and sympathy for the animal rights movement. Just to take this one case, the judge calls the case. Next case is he doesn't call it the Animal Legal Defense Fund versus my client. He says, we're dealing with the animal rights case. And I walked up and I said, Your Honor, this is a false advertising case under the Lanham Act. It's not an animal rights case, right? There's not going to be any difference in the way that we treat our animals based on this lawsuit. So you have to be careful about that. And what's interesting is also just to deal with the animal rights activists, just as an aside, they're funny because I've now had to deal with lawyers, they're lawyers from a whole variety of groups, and they're so serious. Right? They're deathly serious about this thing. They really think they're saving the world, and I love to joke with them, and they don't ever get it. They will. I had one lawyer who was just driving me nuts because she was being so uncooperative, and I said, listen, Nicole, if you're not going to agree to a 3-day extension for me to file a response, I'm going to eat a duck tonight, okay? I was gonna order the vegetarian lasagna, but I'm having a duck instead, okay? So. Because that's how they work, and it really stems from a different notion. They're not litigating these cases. They're not litigating what Jerry said at the very top level. They don't care. They don't really care about the advertising on my client's product. They don't really care about the NPR interview. They know that's not where the battle lines are drawn. They are trying to get, number one, legitimacy in the courts. They are, number two, trying to get money. They file a lawsuit, then they send out a press release to their people so they can get more money and pay their lawyers. And then if the judge can throw out 99% of their lawsuit or their whole lawsuit, like in the SeaWorld case, and they'll pick one line in the opinion that's the saving grace, the one I read you, where it says, although we recognize in some cases, and then they'll issue a press release with that as the headline, judge recognizes animal rights. It's like, I don't know if you saw Dumb and Dumber, But at some point, Jim Carrey asks out the woman, and she totally turns him down. And she says, "I wouldn't, go out with you if, unless whatever she says, you're the last person on earth." And he says, "So you're saying there's a chance, right?" That's their mentality. That's their mentality. We're still alive. We're still in this game, and we're still taken seriously because in front of a judge, a state or federal judge, there's an advocate from each side. They're both dressed in suits. And they have equal, their arguments at least are considered equally in front of a judge, and sometimes too equally in a way, because the judge can't demonstrate any kind of disdain or disappointment in the thing. So take another claim that we've had to deal with. There's and this is probably the major case that I'm having to deal with lately. But before I get to that, so on the issue of what constitutes humane conduct, it's funny because when the shoe is on the other foot, the judges look the other way. So there was a case years ago, Bobby Barosini was a trainer and of primates, right? And he was the subject of a PETA article or some kind of expose that said that he was abusing his animals, was the term that they used, that he's an animal abuser. And he found it very difficult to get work after being labeled and branded an animal abuser in the media. So he brought a lawsuit saying, look, you've defamed me because abuse of animals is something we can clearly draw a line about, and I didn't abuse my animals. He sued PETA. The court threw his case out and said, just like with Humanus, except that in the Humanus case it was the dissenting judge that said that, the majority judge said, no. Animal abuse is one person's abuse is another person's treatment, and you don't have a claim. You can't sue PETA for this. So they were able to walk away from that case. I'm very excited to hear what John has to say, because John has scored a victory against the animals, the ASPCA at least for now, and hopefully the others in some of the activities that they've been engaged in, and that'll be refreshing to hear. Part of this, of course, stems from part of the animal rights cases that we're dealing with stem from what can be called nothing other than just pure anthropomorphism. And it's maddening to deal with not only I saw you, and you didn't read it, Jerry, but there was a part of one of your slides where they say the advice in the law review is you're not allowed to refer to animals as it, has to be his and his and her, regardless of what you're talking about. And that's to anthropomorphize the animals. And the favorite technique they use to win is to argue, at least in court, well, how would you like it if? How would you like it if this was done to you? How would you like it if you had all your freedoms deprived of you? How would you like it? And I think that's the standard that they're trying to create as the legal standard. Because we don't ask, how would you like it if you were a chair and I moved you to the other room and I didn't ask you, right? That's personal property, right? And animals are personal property under the law still. But that's not where they want this to go. They want the same consideration you would give to your friend or your wife or your husband or your sister and asking what you want to do. They want that same consideration for the animals. And I love it because I love to have the how would you like it if conversation, because we win that debate every time, right? It's tempting on its surface. Well, how would you like it if I put you in a cage and put a tube down your throat or only gave you the same kind of meal every time? Like, that sounds terrible when you talk about it in animal agriculture. But then I always say to them, well, how would you like it if I took a hammer and nails and I banged them into the bottom of your feet? What a terrible thing that would be, right? You'd scream and torture, but that's what we do with horses, right? And you don't seem to have a problem with that. Why? Because the horse is made of a different anatomy than you are. How would you like it if I put you on a little string and took you out in the front yard and made you go to the bathroom in front of all the neighbors, right? How would you like it, right? So it gets people thinking that, wait a second, maybe we don't treat our animals with the same, which have the same legal protections that people do. But these are the debates you have to have, and you have to be not just on the defensive about it, you have to be aggressive about that. So speaking of which, my clients followed one of the rare challenges to a law. There are bans all the time. West Hollywood just banned fur a couple months ago. The San Diego people banned puppies, as you know, from breeders if they don't come from a rescue. And many times industries just sit by and accept it and they take their lumps. But I represent the Canadian duck and geese farmers who produce foie gras and also the largest producer of foie gras in the United States. And a variety of restaurants, and they challenged a California law that was passed over a year ago, which is a very dangerous law. Whether you raise pets, whether you raise chickens or cows, you sell milk or eggs, any agricultural product may be subject to regulation if this law stands. And what does the law say? It doesn't say that you can't sell foie gras. There's no ban on foie gras. The Ninth Circuit just said this law doesn't ban foie gras. Governor Schwarzenegger, as he signed it, says this doesn't ban foie gras. The senator who introduced it, John Burton, said this law does not ban foie gras. Well, then why does everyone call it the foie gras law? Well, here's what it bans. It says a product, well, first what California says is you can't force feed a duck in California. I think it's misguided. The California Department of Food and Agriculture actually said in a memo that they sent to the governor at the time that there's no cruelty involved in foie gras, that it's a normal, humane production method. Didn't matter. Legislature said that you can't force feed a duck in California. Fine. You want to regulate your own animals, knock yourself out. But then what California did is something different. It said you can't sell in California product of an animal that's been force-fed. Do you mean a product of an animal that's been force-fed in California? The statute doesn't say. So you mean it could be a product of an animal that's force-fed in Canada or New York or Texas? That's what they mean. That's what the court said that that statute means. And that's very dangerous, because what possible interest does California have in a duck that's given life, fed, and slaughtered, turned into packaged USDA-inspected wholesome products in another state, or even in Canada or NAFTA trading partner, and then sold in California? You don't like it, don't buy it. But what interest does the state have in banning that product? And when we were in front of the Ninth Circuit arguing this, we tried to tell the judges, if you can do that, you could also ban milk that comes from a cow that wasn't hand-milked. I bet you the cow would prefer the hand-milking than the mechanical milking. And so could a state ban all the dairy products, ice cream and cheese, that come from a cow that wasn't hand-milked, even in another state, because you don't think that's nice enough? And then one of the judges said, well, what about child labor practices? And I said, what about child labor practices? He said, what about the practices in Bangladesh where they don't pay their workers enough? I said, well, what does California pay in minimum wage? $8 an hour? You know what the people in Washington State think about that? You're paying too little. They pay $9.19 an hour as a minimum wage. So can they ban your products? Or how about New York bans avocados that are picked by illegal immigrants? Perfectly good avocados. Now we're going to wonder who picked this? So it's a very, very dangerous thing to ban products based on the production method, to ban puppies. You can't sell a puppy in a pet store because why? It came from a breeder out of state, it didn't come from a rescue. What does it matter where the puppy came from? What does it matter if the puppy is healthy, right, and harmless? What does it matter if your chicken came from your egg came from a chicken in a cage that had, as California requires now, enough room for the chicken to completely turn around and spread her wings without touching any other chicken? I didn't even have that much room in my seat on the airplane here, right? And California requires that for its chickens. Well, knock yourself out, California. That's what the voters were asked. The voters were asked, do you want chickens? Do you want your eggs to come from chickens in cages that were where they had a particular size? California voters said yes. They didn't ask them as part of that question, how much more do you want to pay for those eggs, right? They didn't ask that question. And then, of course, the legislature realized, wait a second, our voters just put handicap on our chicken farmers, on our egg farmers, because now all the other out-of-state producers can send their eggs in at the same price that they were before, and now we have to invest in new cages. So then the legislature enacted a bill to say, well, no, you have to have the same size chicken. What if Texas says, you call that big? I'll tell you what's big in Texas. The cages need to be 2-bedroom, 2-bath with wall-to-wall carpeting. And unless you have those kinds of cages, so what, you're a farmer, you're someone like Ty farming eggs, and you got to have 50 different chicken cages? These are going to Minnesota, these are going to New York. It's absurd. But that's the direction that the animal rights activists want this to go in. And that's why they file these lawsuits. And they get litigation passed where they can find something in there that they can then argue in court. So we're challenging that law because it's important that we establish, for an interstate commerce perspective, that states aren't allowed to do this kind of thing. You can regulate your own animals, however unwise that may be, and that's where the fight should take place that you've heard earlier today, fighting at the local level and fighting at the state level. But you can't engage in that kind of conduct. So it reminds me, we're kind of on the front lines in dealing with foie gras, and it reminds me, because when we try to get support from the chicken farmers or the pork people or the cattle people, they go, oh, foie gras, come on. Who's ever had that? I don't even want to ask you because it'll be embarrassing. A show of hands, how many people can spell it? How many people have ever tasted it? How many people have ever purchased it yourself? Because people have had it, they've had it at a cocktail party. But it's a product that's unfortunately not been tried by 99.9%. So it's easy to say, oh, they came for foie gras, right? What's going to happen when they come for chicken fingers, right? That's when you'll get the young people up in arms. When they come for chicken fingers, right? And it just reminds me of the famous quote that everybody's heard, first they came for the socialists and I wasn't a socialist, so I said nothing. And then they came for the trade unionists and I wasn't a trade unionist, so I said nothing. And then, when they came for me, there was nobody left. So that's basically the theme of my talk. There are a variety of people in this room today from different walks of life. All of you deal with animals in some way. That's why you're here. I thank Patty for getting us all together. And if you listen to any of the messages that came out from the presentations earlier, there is strength in being united about this stuff. And so there's no reason to point the finger and say, oh, well, that's foie gras, or those are Dalmatians, and who cares about this? It doesn't matter. There's a unified front for more or less on the other side that we have to resist. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can, and I will look forward to your comments. Questions, anyone? Someone to take the microphone? Okay.
I'm a theater-trained person. I think everybody will be able to hear me. How many of these laws that are being passed in places like California could possibly be challenged under interstate commerce?
Well, that's the basis of our challenge against the foie gras law, so to speak, the one that involves the raising of ducks. In January of 2015, you'll have a bill that takes effect that deals with the raising of hens, egg-laying hens in cages, also veal, calves, and sows in the gestation crates. And so that law doesn't take effect till January 2015. It's difficult to challenge a law like that constitutionally until it's taken effect, because you need to show that it's unconstitutional in every application. We waited until our law took effect on July 1st of last year. July 1st was a Sunday. I would have been at the courthouse that day, but it's closed. So I filed on Monday morning the next day. And so you'll have to wait until sometime in January of 2015 or just prior. And that would be the basis. That is, I think, a valid basis for challenging. Although the courts have not considered it. One thing to think about, in California about 10 years ago passed a law that said you can't trap fur animals using steel-jawed leg-hold traps because that's cruel. And I don't know anything about trapping animals, but let's assume that's the case. California has every right to regulate the wildlife in its state that way. But then what California said is you can't sell the fur from an animal trapped in that way in California, if the animal was trapped in California. And that was challenged by the National Trappers Association, who represent trappers from all over the country, and said, you can't do that, that's unconstitutional. And the Ninth Circuit said, oh no, that's okay. Why? Because we limited it to the sale of animals trapped within our state. And they said, if you trap your animals in 49 other states, or any other country, you're welcome to sell those animals there. And that was the basis by which that was found constitutional. We pointed that out to the Ninth Circuit panel in my case. We pointed it out in our opening brief. We pointed it out on a reply brief. The court issued a 27-page opinion and never ever mentioned that case, because it's very difficult to distinguish that case if you had to cite it, so they just ignore it. And we've got that a petition for review of that opinion on. Yeah.
I'm also from California, so I appreciate both of you gentlemen, first of all. But is there any kind of confederation between the attorney, confederation of the various attorneys who are on our side, so that those of us, from lesser groups, have the opportunity to consult with you?
That's a very good question. So it's the animal rights lawyers are like on an instant message with each other the second anything comes down. Then they use every one of the cases. Believe me, as soon as one of these judges says something funny, I see it in the next case, and they use it as a basis. On our side, I don't know that we're so good. I mean, I reached out to John when I saw he was part of this. I reached out to one of his partners who's dealing with the fur case, and I reached out to the people at Purdue, the defending the chicken case, to offer what I could there, because I had just litigated this issue about what's humane, and I wanted to provide them with some authorities. But we're unfortunately not as united in that way. There is no comparable thing to ALDF, where we have a network of 100,000, or even if that's exaggerated, but even if we had 1,000 lawyers who do this work pro bono lots of times, and they get credit for that, saying they're saving the animals.
Okay, we're just gonna take a quick break. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're gonna take a quick break. Bring everybody back then for John Simpson. Probably have a couple more questions then, and then we'll start up with Dr. Waters after that. Quick, very quick, like 5-minute quick potty break.